The city of Macon is somewhat of a musical colossus, really. Its contributions to the world, in fact, are well known, although most people don't know from whence said songs came. Otis Redding's Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, of course, set in San Francisco, is really a reminiscence about the place from which he came more than anything else. The Allman Brothers, of course, and many others, really, this city has given to the world. Chicago performed here last night, October 25th, 2017. And it was really a fantastic show. Robert Lamb and two, at least, original members of the band put on a really good show, and the city enjoyed it. The response was positive. But I was curious, and I'd always wondered why it is that Peter Cetera's 1976 hit, If You Leave Me Now, killed the band. And in many ways it did, with the production of that song and that being their first number one hit. Terry Kath was dead within 2 years. Now, he committed suicide accidentally with a round in a chamber that he was playing around with guns with. And Terry had a bit of a drug and alcohol problem, and he took risks. He took the clip out of that particular gun, and there was no bullet in it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this kind of risky behavior might not set off some red flags. But if I know anything about the topic here that we're driving at, and that is cluster B personality disorders, they don't take risks, really. They are bold, but they take risks they know they can get away with. They've been doing it all their lives. They're highly practiced at risk-taking, and they're thus very good at it. And I wondered, because having been through my recent experience, and having been in the middle of processing really a 25-year relationship now, a quarter of a century, with my ex-wife, who I am fairly certain does suffer from a cluster B personality disorder, I wondered about the song Feeling Stronger Every Day. Who wrote it? What was it about? Because it speaks directly to the breakup, in my opinion, of some relationship between a person and a cluster B. The question is, which is which? Indeed, Cetera did write that piece. And if you look at Cetera's history, you'll see that his voice is the way it is as a result of reconstructive surgery that he had to have due to a fight that he got into at a baseball game in 1970. You'll find that his first marriage lasted 5 years and was over. You'll find that his second lasted 10 or 11 and then was over. You will also find that nearly every single song he does is co-written. You'll wonder whether he wrote any of it at all. And having said that, though, the lyrics to the song in question, which Chicago did perform last night, in fact, here in Macon, but only the chorus of Feeling Stronger Every Day. He talks about a relationship that is really quite problematic, as have been all of Cetera's relationships, if you look at it. And the story, actually, of his entry into Chicago, he being the last member to join, is quite fascinating. He was touring with a band, found the band that would become Chicago. I just went to go see him, the big thing. And he was touring with a competing band, The Exceptions, and he had been with them for several years. But then he sees Chicago, what will be Chicago, and within 2 weeks is a member of that band, just dumps the previous and joins that one. This is odd, to say the least. And while he initially claimed that he adored the horns, he also says later, and many of his band members report he hated the horns. In a biography, or at least in some biographical writing, some quote, he says, there was just a lot of, Chicago broke up because there was just a lot of infighting and pettiness and jealousy and squabbling over money. Well, yeah, at that stage, Cetera was demanding half of the profits of the band. And if he is, in fact, the cluster B who is speaking to his ex in that particular song in question, Feeling Stronger Every Day, then it would make perfect sense that, in fact, he suffers from a cluster B personality disorder. He's had no stable relationships throughout his life, it appears. He also gets into fights that are problematic. He creates discord and disharmony everywhere he goes, and he projects his own greed onto his band members. This strikes me as very good evidence of exactly the kind of thing one ought to look for when considering a relationship with a sociopath, or any other cluster B personality disordered person for that matter. Cetera was so petty, in fact, that he refused to show up at the Grammy Awards and stand with the former band members to receive recognition for their induction into the Rock and Roll Music Hall of Fame. This is odd in the extreme. He lives in relative seclusion in rural Idaho near a ski resort. I have no reason to believe that he isn't continually interested in risky behavior, and it does appear that he enjoys the adrenaline rush that is typical for those with cluster B disorders who need something to pump the adrenaline just to make them feel alive. A haunting emptiness and boredom dominates the way they feel the world. In typical cluster B behavior, and fitting with that theory, Cetera can be seen throughout his life as going for the new shiny thing over and over, and initially loving the horns, then claiming to hate the horns in a band, and then when he releases his first studio album, lo and behold, its biggest hit features, well, horns, and is co-written by his then-wife, Diane Nini. In fact, as I mentioned again, nearly every one of his songs is co-written, and it would be typical of a cluster B to ensure that other people do the work and he gets the credit. He only married twice that we know of, but if he didn't marry a third time, my suspicion would be because he didn't want to give away any of his fortune. He is notoriously greedy, insisting on not only half of the proceeds of Chicago, but at one point, full name billing ahead of the band, Peter Cetera and Chicago, he wanted to call it. And then later, he projects bitterness, jealousy, and greed upon to his former band members, who certainly did not deserve it and considered themselves all equal. Compare that to other members of the band whose relationships have been long and sustained. Longane has a 50-year relationship with his wife, quite different than Cetera's history. And Cetera looked like he wanted to become a musician quite early, obviously in defiance of his father and mother. His mother wanted him to be a priest. He went to Catholic schools on the south side of Chicago. And his father wanted him to play the accordion. Instead, he went out and got an electric guitar and bragged at the age of 18 that he was making more money than his father. I see uncanny evidence of cluster B disorder in this particular person. Even his photographs give the typical same look, open eyes, blank in many ways, that is typical of cluster B disordered individuals. I'm not capable of diagnosing the person. However, having learned the signs, having known what to look for in someone's history, is of immense value in determining with whom any of us might want to enter into a relationship. I would suggest that Cetera's contributions were, while phenomenal, almost certainly someone else's contributions and not his, for which he took credit and money and then punished those who were good to him. He undoubtedly silenced his opposition, as no one explains why he lost those relationships.